Hi Internet, I'm Stefan, and welcome to another Revival Daily. This week has been extremely busy in the shop, and we've got a whole bunch of stuff going on, and almost all of it is centered on these Bruff Superior motorcycles that you've heard a little bit about if you've been following along. The reason we're so focused on these is because in about a week we'll need to leave for the motorcycle Cannonball, and that is the race. Technically it's a race, it's more of a ride or an exhibition that goes from Portland, Maine all the way to Portland, Oregon, and that ends up being around 4,000 miles. Doesn't sound like a big deal if you're driving in your brand new 2018 Civic, but if you're driving a 1920s British motorcycle, this is kind of a challenge. So what we're doing is trying to make all the preparations we can to have the best chance of success, and also to go through these antiques and find out all kinds of weird problems and challenging things, and we get to learn all sorts of stuff about how they were put together along the way. So this is one of the SS80s. This is not necessarily going to be the bike that is on the trip, but since we had to do some work on the gas tank for a different part of the project, we decided we'd also take a look to compare some of the parts on this bike with the SS80 that we're actually going to be running. So a couple of things that we can point out really quick. These exhaust collars are one of the critical items. On the other bike, the collar had actually cracked right here, and so it's completely unusable. And it's not like you can just go to the JMP catalog or an HD Twins catalog and just order up a new one. So we actually had to CNC machine new exhaust collars. That sounds easy enough, and it really isn't too bad. It's a relatively straightforward part. What gets difficult is that we have 4 of these here in the shop because we've got the 2 per bike, and as we were making these, we took all 4 of them off and compared them. Each one is different. There isn't a single dimension that matches up between them. It's almost like they were made by hand one at a time, and they probably were. So that means that each exhaust pipe doesn't fit correctly. So now when you start trying to figure out how to CNC this and what size it's supposed to be, all bets are off, and it's really just kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best. Let's see, what else? We get these valve inspection ports. You'll notice my makeshift Band-Aid here because I was working with some sheet metal and sliced my finger. But these have sealing issues, and even just finding the correct type of sealing washers to go in here is a challenge. So we'll end up getting to machine some new copper ones in a couple of days. Let's see, what other fun stuff are we dealing with? Magnetos. Down behind this cover, this is a self-excited ignition system called a magneto, and these work really well as long as you have a good functioning capacitor. The condenser capacitor is critical to the function, and the original ones from the 1920s, they just aren't going to cut it. Oh, what else? We also have to get some racing numbers put on. We've got to do a little bit of work on the kicker returns. So I think we've covered the kick shaft spline in a different video and some of the work that went into recreating the kickers on these bikes. But now there's a new problem in that when they return after kicking, they want to over travel, and although there's an internal stop inside the transmission, it's not adequate to arrest all the weight of this kicker when it snaps back. So it sounds easy, right? Just drive from Portland, Maine to Portland, Oregon, but the devil's in the details, and I think we should probably go out into the container and talk to Ted for a minute and see what he's been up to. Hey,
Hey there.
Here's a guy.
What's happening?
How's it going in the container today?
It's good. Machining things.
What you machining?
Right now we're doing some exhaust parts for Ducati and I think one of the Guzzi's that Ty's building an exhaust for.
But these don't really look like Ducati or Guzzi exhaust parts.
I forgot.
Yeah. These look like a very specific part that goes on a Bruff Superior. So what did it take to actually make this thing?
So step 1 is measuring it, right?
We actually talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. So measure it, back it out, get it into CAD, and then going into CAM and figuring out tool paths. And yeah, I've got the program there. You want to take a look at it?
Well, before we do, I think the whole measure it, we all talk about like the measure twice, cut once philosophy. In this case, it's measure like 18 times and cut once, because every single part, original part, is completely different, and basically every dimension is different, and everything has been hand fit, so you kind of have to just guess at an average.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the bike was what, 1925? It wasn't standards like there are today. There weren't a lot of consistencies. So.
Right, and even though this is a what was it, a 2x20 thread?
2x20, yeah.
Even though it was a 2x20 thread, the nominal thread dimensions, or the correct thread form, didn't work with the nuts and didn't work with the cast pieces. So
yeah, because even given the thread form, there's still differences in major and minor diameter, whether it's a machined or a formed thread.
So yes, these little guys, threads, it's easy to take them for granted, but this is a really challenging thing for a machinist to get exactly right. You really have to have it perfect every time. Let's take a look at your simulation.
Let's see, this one. So there it is in CAD. Show just the sketch, the intricacies of how many different dimensions to sketch that part out. And then we go into the CAM world and go ahead and just regenerate them, regenerate the tool paths. So this is looking down on our part as if we were
in the machine.
Yeah, in the machine, on the lathe, turning the profile. So we've got our grooving tool there. I'll go ahead and simulate it. You can watch what it's supposed to do.
All right. And it goes just like this on the machine, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's never any variation, and it all just falls along perfect.
Just as nice.
Yeah. It is handy, though, being able to simulate this before you push the button, because it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I mean, if you screw up anything on a lathe with this much power and that much mass flying around, you can do some damage.
It's easy, though. Once you do it once, it's like riding a bike.
Well, that's the great thing about this. We made 6 total. So I got the first one done, and it took a couple hours tuning the program and the threads, and then after that was set, it was like, all right, 5 more. Insert stock, push go, hang out, surf Instagram or whatever.
Right, yeah, surf Instagram. That's what you want to tell your boss. You mean work on other projects while the robots do your work?
It is. I know this is nerdy, but it's extremely gratifying to have that robot going and that one over there.
I know.
Have both machines. I'm working on a computer, and it's great. It's productive.
Oh, right. That's the other thing I kind of forget about. So you can machine this hex, no problem. Like, that's an easy thing to do at this point. But you don't necessarily have a wrench to turn it.
Yes, yeah.
This was what, 2 1/8, and that's a little outside of the tool set that we keep around here. And fortunately, you can just make new ones.
Yeah.
And as soon as we remembered that, we realized, oh, this bike has like 5 different fasteners that we need specific wrenches for. So then it turns into, all right, make a wrench set.
Yeah. Especially once you have the basic program, little tweaks for the difference in the actual wrench size, not a problem.
Yeah. So that's just part of the fun of working on these antique machines. You never really know what you're getting. It's sort of that Forrest Gump thing. Life is like a box of chocolates. Once you open up a bruff, who knows what's in there?
Yeah.
We can actually go and take a look at the bike that this stuff is all going on, and show a couple of the installed parts and see what else is happening in the fab room.
Cool.
Good job. Keep it up.
Thanks. I'm gonna keep making chips.
Nice.
Later.
How's it going in here?
Going pretty good.
So what you doing?
Right now, taking a look at the primary chain, about to take apart the clutch assembly. I think this is probably one of the weakest areas on the bike. I know we had a lot of problems 4 years ago when we did the Cannonball, so just want to make sure the clutch is in as good a shape as possible. But aside from that, Andy's working on making some really pretty mounts for the Cannonball number plates. We've also got a new, slightly more modern carburetor. So
More modern, meaning like 5 years newer than the one that was on it. So 1930s technology instead of 1925.
Yeah, 1930s, 1940s, so that way there's tunability. Aside from that, we're also adding better rubber insulation for the fuel tank, trying to keep vibrations down. And then next is to tear apart the front ends and the rear wheel and just go through everything and make sure it looks good.
Nice. It's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about anymore, because on a modern bike or pretty much anything after mid-60s, we kind of don't see the primary anymore. Everything
true.
goes unit. And so this would be considered a pre-unit type of design, where you've got the engine as a separate power plant from the transmission. The coupling between those two, and this is mostly, obviously you know this, the coupling between those two gets pretty tricky, and the amount of force applied through this drivetrain is all of the torque that this engine has. And they decided to put that way out here on this unsupported cantilevered shaft, so the bushings inside this transmission have to do so much work. That's one of the reasons we say this is the weak link of the machine, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we take it apart right now.
Absolutely. The engine on this bike is, considering the year it's from, is amazing. It's really good technology. The bottom end is solid. The top end, you can't underestimate the agricultural nature of these machines.
They are pretty much glorified irrigation pumps, aren't they? But they do work, and I was impressed when we were doing shakedown rides last week, how the riding experience on this bike is.
Absolutely.
It kind of, to me, it felt like trying to drive a steam locomotive, where you give it some throttle, you count to like 15 or 20 as it gradually sort of builds this chug-along pace, but it definitely moves and it's pretty quick.
Yeah, and one of the things I was going to point out, but Ty is actually working on that somewhere else, but the Kickstarter return stop, one of the main reasons we do this sorting is to test what we've repaired and what we fixed and see how it holds up.
Is that kicker, is the old stop over there, or our second try?
No, he's off working on it in another part of the shop.
I thought it was down here. I wanted to show these guys. Yeah? Ty will grab that, but what keeps happening, so the kick stop is supposed to be mounted here, kind of like this, right? So this gets mounted, this should be on the other side.
Correct.
So this guy goes on the other side, and you kick the bike, and it doesn't start, and it kicks back, and it sends the kicker into this stop and bends the living shit out of it.
Exactly.
Right? So if we make this stronger so that it doesn't bend, next up, blow up the case of the transmission, and that's even harder to find.
Yeah, and on every single one of the bruffs we have in the shop right now, that hole is stripped on the transmission case.
I think it's kind of worth acknowledging that we are in a privileged position to be able to compare all these different things one to another at the same time. Having 3 bruffs in the shop changes the game. If this was the only bike we were dealing with, it'd be kind of head scratching and guesswork to figure out, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Is this the way it should be? So, and if the stop doesn't work, what happens is the kicker moves as far forward as it is right now, and it gets stuck. And now the ratchet doesn't work, and you can't get back into a position to start the engine.
Yeah, and even worse is it gets in the way of the back brake, so you can't stop.
And while this does have front brakes, they're not even a suggestion.
Front brakes.
Yeah, it's Flintstone brakes would be better than that thing is, and all the hope in the world is hanging on that in the back. Let's see, what other stuff do we have to do?
You talk about these pretty guys?
Yeah, we talked about these a little bit. So these got installed, and where's your wrench for the install?
Wrenches, our Bruff Superior CNC machined wrench set.
Yeah, so that's the fun of it. You get to make all these fancy tools to work on an old machine. I don't think that there's a catalog where we can order this kind of stuff.
Not yet, we're working on it.
Did some fun stuff too on these designs where we actually added a pocket for a 3/8 drive socket if we needed to do extensions and stuff. But yeah, with all these different size things, we need all these different wrenches because they didn't do things like making common fastener sizes.
Yeah, in addition, we could get wrenches this size, but they're gonna be this long and heavy steel, so we want something we can keep on the bike. And
oh yeah, and those wrenches are expensive.
yeah, exactly.
That just adds up, and it's at this point it becomes cheaper just to make them. Yeah, let's see, other fun stuff we got going. Rear sprocket, you just opened the catalog and bought one of those, right?
Yeah, that's next up on the two machine list. And then, is that the fuel tank mount?
Yeah, that's one thing. This bike, you noticed that it had a really small fuel capacity.
Yeah, and it gets terrible gas mileage too.
You're kidding. So in order to make sure that you guys can complete the stages self-supported, we're going to add a jerry can to the back of this.
Exactly. They suggest a range of 60 to 90 miles, which we're sure we can hit that. But there are several days that are 120, 140 miles between gas stops. So we want to make sure we don't run out of gas.
Yeah, it's happened to all of us. It's no fun at all. So the plan is to put a Rotopax mount here, and it just works out that a gallon Rotopax seems to fit kind of exactly for that rear rack. Then after that, we just have to go through the rest of the bike, and then we should be ready to leave in a week.
Yeah, no sweat.
Cool. Magneto. What has to happen with this guy?
So the Magneto, the most common failure on Magnetos is the capacitor goes bad, which basically it no longer has the ability to store spark. So what we're going to do is take the Magneto off the motorcycle, completely disassemble it, and we're going to install a solid state, a modern capacitor, really. And I've actually already test fit it here on the bike if you want to come get a shot of this laser.
This is one of those things that I find really fascinating. It's kind of fun. So if you look in there, it's really hard to see it. Let's see, we've got a pointing device here. Right there, that little guy, you can see that maybe there's a little bit of green circuit board behind it. That's a printed circuit board with a surface mount capacitor that is based on like modern electronics technology.
Yep.
And it replaces
a capacitor about that size.
Yeah.
That's housed inside the armature of this Magneto.
Right, so you take something that's about the size of a brownie and shrink it down into that thing that's about the size of a chiclet. And this is one way that we can kind of add some more modern technology into an antique machine to get much better reliability.
Exactly.
Obviously this bike does have a generator on it, but we've made the decision to not bother with that.
Yeah, the added heat from the generator is another potential failure point for the Magneto, so we just didn't want to add any more risk than we're already taking on.
And these run on a 6-volt system with 6-volt batteries, and the lighting is not impressive for 6-volt systems. You can't get LEDs really in 6-volt. So instead, we're going to just opt for a self-contained total loss LED lighting system, and that's all being kind of driven through bicycle technology, which is handy.
Yeah, the LED technology's come along significantly, even since the last Cannonball when we did this 4 years ago. So now we could buy a self-contained tail light, brake light that actually can tell when the bike is braking and lights up. And then also an LED that, as Stefan mentioned, is totally self-contained, so we don't have to rely on the wiring of the bike or the generator, just minimizing risk.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this all comes down to, is trying to predict what's the first thing that's going to go wrong, what can we do to deal with that situation. So that's why you also going to go through every bushing, bearing, and system in the front end, same for the rear. The whole girder style front end is very dependent on the bushings. So got a lot of work to do.
Nah, that's straightforward. We're starting with a great example, the Bruff Superior. Just the quality of the build is much better, so we can focus on things like making it more reliable instead of casting a new engine case that's actually going to last the Cannonball, or making a crankshaft assembly that's actually going to last, because this bike was built to go 100 miles an hour.
So basically what you're saying is, in comparison to the other bikes from this period, at least it's not a Harley.
Exactly. Exactly.
Anyway, this is what caused us to have to remachine those exhaust collars. Very clearly there's a giant missing chunk, and it might have been welded and repaired a handful of times, but you can see that that's continuing to crack. You got to remember, this is a chunk of cast aluminum from the early 20s, and aluminum hadn't really been around for that long. It didn't really become commercially viable until pretty much the turn of the century. So they only had 20 years to play with the stuff, and it in no way was as refined as it is today.
Right.
So
and a lot of magnesium and other
impurities and alloying weirdness.
Right.
So the 6061 billet is probably going to hold up a little longer than this. You can see we've definitely got our work cut out for us, and I think standing around and talking about it might be fun, but it isn't going to get it done.
Yeah, I need to get back to work.
Right on, man. Well, we are excited to get on with this project, and I can't wait to actually get on the road. We'll try and get you guys updates from the road while we're on the Cannonball, and in the meantime, if you want to get those, you need to like, comment, subscribe, whatever. Tell us what you want to see. Tell us what you don't like. Yeah, so I appreciate you watching and look forward to future updates.